rolling.
We're rolling.
We've been
Mics
waiting
are
all
on.
day. Been waiting all day for this. So Zach, I don't know how we're supposed to start this panel, but as we just start like we always start on our podcast and just wing it.
I'm going to let you do that. It's your field day. It's easier for me if you figure it out.
Well, so with this panel, I think we are going to dig into some relevant stuff here, which is going to be awesome. And so with us, we'll let these guys introduce themselves. And again, being able to record this and continue to just spread the message and stuff here. And throughout season 3 of the Fieldwork podcast, we've been talking about scaling regenerative ag. We did a special project here on Washington County and many of the farmers that were in attendance here today. And to me, what I want to talk about in this panel is how do we continue to go and build from here? For the people that were here, the amazing crowd that we had, and the great key people that were really here to make a difference. And Mike, I don't know if you knew, Representative Marianne Weeks was here this morning as well. So it's great to have her. But we've got some real momentum going here. Awesome crowd. Some people, of course, had to go home here now throughout the day, but great to be able to really build off of this and build off of looking at Washington County, looking at leading farmers like we heard from all day, but then leading as a state here too. And then working with a group like Rabobank to be able to lead nationally throughout North America and globally too. That this is really continuing to build out and go from there. But why don't we just start, Mike? You get the mic. Introduce yourself and tell us, what's kind of your outlook here when it comes to sustainability in Iowa?
Well, first of all, it's great to be here, and thanks to all of you for being here. I know this has been I've seen the agenda. Unfortunately, I couldn't get here any sooner. I would have liked to have spent a little more time here today than just come in here for the roundtable. But what a great set of topics. And I thought as we were coming down, that, and Mitchell knows this, and I'm seeing some friendly faces out here. I've been in Washington County many times, and I'm really proud of the work that's been done here. I kept thinking about how, yes, there's a lot of new things that we're talking about here, a lot of where are we going? There's a healthy skepticism about what's happening with carbon and the potential for carbon markets. And yet I pick up a lot of optimism. I myself am very optimistic about where this can go. And in large part, it's because of where we are today based on the work that's been done for decades in a state like Iowa and a county like Washington County. We're really in one of the foundational places in the state of Iowa for something like cover crops. A lot of the initial work, a lot of the innovation was done many years ago here. And we've been able to learn a lot from that and apply that across the state. So that was what really struck me as I was coming down here today about how what a great place, what a hotbed of conservation activity and focus on soil health. I think last year, I keep telling this story, I was on one of Mitchell's farms where he's demonstrating cover crops and it had rained the day before. You remember, right? I said, well, typically you wouldn't walk in a field the day after, right? You'd be getting your boots dirty. He says, no, come on out, let's go. And we walked across. No mud on our boots, right? Talk about that stuck with me, and I've told that story many times. That tells me what's happening with water in a field that's been treated with that's had cover crops, especially one for cover crops and no-till for many years. That's really stuck with me. It's because of where we are today. It's because of that great work that's been done that we've got a good foundation for where we know we need to go.
Christian, we got to hear from you. Introduce yourself and explain who is Rabo. Who are you? What's your role? We'll dig into it more later. And Zach can get some of these burning questions off his chest.
All right. Thank you so much for the invitation to be on the panel. Okay, here we go. So my name is Christian Markin. I'm the Vice President of Sustainability for North America on the rural side of Rabobank. I got a few of my colleagues here, so if you guys want to have a conversation about Rabobank, we can do that. But before I say anything else, Mitchell, I gotta say this. You are just absolutely amazing. Okay, so why don't we give a round of applause to Mitchell for putting this together? Because you never got one. Everything that I wanted to say, all of you guys are amazing. I mean, the reason why we're even here talking about sustainability in agriculture in one sentence is because what our farmers have done for the past 150 years in this country. If you pull data from USDA and other places, and look at the unbelievable continuous improvement and efficiencies and innovation that has taken place, it's just unbelievable that we've come this far. So you look at it and you go like, we're done, right? I mean, we produce the most sustainable food in the US and in particular places like Iowa. We can't stop. And I'll explain in a minute why we cannot stop. We actually have to learn from that and continue that journey. But let me just say a few words about Rockbank. So if you're not familiar with the organization, it's one of the top 20 financial lenders in the world. What's unique about Rockbank is that 116 years old. Started as a cooperative in Netherlands, is still a cooperative in Netherlands. It's one of the largest financial lenders. Like I said, it's about $750 billion in assets globally. We're operating here in the US on two fronts. We got corporate lending, and through Rockaway Agri Finance, which is a part of, we actually finance the top farmers and producers in this country as well. But there are two things, if you want to remember, just very, like summarized talking points about Rockbank. Two things about Rockbank. Number one is we're the only financial institution in the world that does nothing but food and agriculture. Our mission is grow a better world together with you. Okay, so it's all food and agriculture. Number two, it's all about sustainability financing. So everything that we do, we try to weave in sustainability in everything that we do. So with that stage set, let's talk about sustainability for a minute and why we need to continue that journey. I don't know if you guys know this, but we're adding 1 billion people a decade on this planet. And that trend is going to continue at least until 2050, 2060. So we're about 7.8 billion people today. We're going to be about 10 billion people by 2050. We never experienced this before. We cannot go back to 1950s and the way we produced agriculture back then because we had 2.5 billion people on the planet. We're adding 100 million people a year on the planet. That's why we cannot stop. Okay, we got to do more with less. We're running out of stuff. Okay, think about it this way: we got to produce 70% more food with the same input as today. Where's that going to come from? We got to do things differently than what we're doing today. We're going to learn from the past and hopefully identify these opportunities better for the future.
We got a lot to unpack there, Zach.
Yep. There's a lot to unpack with carbon markets in general.
Well, what I think is overall with sustainability, I'm like, yeah, that feeding growing population, but doing it with less erosion, doing it with less inputs, but be able to create a better, nutritious product too, and sequester carbon, improve water, and do all these things. So, Zach, we can lead wherever we want to go, but maybe let's dig a little bit deeper and Christian on. Okay, so or Mike, we've looked at this through Iowa for the nutrient reduction strategy, right? So how do we continue to drive and get all of these different things solved, all these problems?
I'll show you my notes. So I'm kind of, I have to draw myself a picture sometimes. So at the bottom of this, I've got a little progression that I made here. As I was again trying to put some thought around this. I like the way you kind of framed that up. So what I wrote down was we've got an opportunity to generate environmental credits or carbon credits. We're focused on needing to improve soil health. We are working on improving water quality. We need to continue to prevent soil erosion. We have to have a market or access to the marketplace and a license to operate. And we need to be working on improving habitat. And I was doing the same thing. Then I said, well, that all leads to sustainability and resiliency, right? And however you define that, there's lots of ways to define it. But sustainability and resiliency equals productivity and profitability. And those things equal quality of life for all of us who are in agriculture, but also for those we serve. That was my progression as I went through it. But I definitely think that, again, as let's dig in a little bit on this carbon space and just environmental credits generally. around sustainability. Again, as we view it here in the state of Iowa, we are well positioned. I believe Iowa farmers are well positioned. Our agribusinesses are well positioned. That long history that we have in this state, and it's a history of public-private partnerships working to get things done. So you go back. Iowans, USDA gets into the kind of soil conservation business. Iowans adopt the soil and water conservation districts across the state. In the 70s, the state of Iowa becomes the first state in the nation to use state appropriation dollars for cost share for soil conservation, soil erosion prevention. And then we become the first state to implement our nutrient reduction strategy, looking at phosphorus and nitrogen reductions coming off of farms. So we've got a long history of being leaders, and that's not because of government, by the way. That's because of Iowa farmers and Iowans being who they are. And so how can we then build on that great foundation to carry us forward? And again, it's through many of the same things that that have got us to where we are today on these nutrient reduction strategy and soil conservation is working in partnership, working to de-risk the adoption of new practices, whatever they may be. We may be talking cover crops, no-till, nitrate reducing wetlands, nutrient management, you name it. It could be many more, but there will certainly be innovation in this space. But it's when you de-risk those things, you provide technical assistance, we can provide some financial assistance, a marketplace develops to sell off credits. This all results in more interest, awareness, and more adoption of practices across the state. So again, it's trying to address this from, not that we're gonna, hey, let's sweep away everything that we've done for all the reasons that we've done today, because we're gonna start focusing only on carbon from here forward. No, that's not what we're talking about. We need to build on top of that, and these layers of benefit will come to us. But that's the approach. We need to. I'll say this too, that government doesn't have all the answers, right? Government doesn't have all the answers, so it is only through private-public partnerships that we're going to be able to advance. I like to say government can do a few things. One, we can get the heck out of the way. We can help convene people and bring partners together, and then we can act. But let's start with that first one. Sometimes we need to get out of the way and let the marketplace develop a little bit and be a player in that, or ensure that there's fairness in the marketplace. But government doesn't have all the answers. Don't be surprised that we aren't the most innovative player at the table, okay? But how can we be enable progress in this space?
I'm surprised to hear that government doesn't have all the answers.
Is that a surprise to you?
Yeah, that was shocking.
In Minnesota, I think it has all the answers. So that's the
I'd say we
We
should
don't need to get into that.
we should ask for a poll here, but I've never asked a question you don't know the answer to already. But I think that I think there are a few nodding heads out here.
Christian, I want to ask you a question. You had mentioned before about how Rabobank does tons of financing, and the mission is to grow along with farmers. And the financing that you do, there's always kind of an undertone of sustainability, right? Can you give me an example of that? What do you mean if I come to you as a farmer and I want to work with you as a lender? I mean, what does that look like when you talk about having that undertone of sustainability?
Well, it starts with recognizing that first there is an opportunity to do things different, right? So we're looking at partnering with clients that have that opportunity recognized. The other thing is you have to understand sustainability, like the secretary said it really well. It's just covered. There's about 40, 50 indicators in environmental, social, and economic that you can act on, right? Carbon is just one of them. Okay, so you can create the carbon absolutely fantastic product that's actually not the most sustainable product. It's just screwed up everywhere else. So you got to keep that balance, in check. So if you look at, so we got to have that mindset of sustainability, and working with clients on sustainability takes multiple actions, right? Now, if you think of sustainability as a continuous improvement journey, which is what we've been on for the past 150 years, you got to start like every journey. If I want to go back home to Colorado, I have to know where I'm at right now. I got to take a car and I have to go to the airport. That's not. So same thing with sustainability. You got to take a baseline. You got to know where you are. So that's what we work with our clients on, in terms of trying to figure out where are we, where are they, in sustainability on that journey today? Where are they in terms of impact categories of sustainability 40 to 50 ones that impact their business in the market segments? Try to identify the opportunities where we can actually change things and help them through financing and change things, right? So we do have targeted financing for like solar and we do dairy digesters and so on, where we have targeted financing. But we hope to develop a lot more than that in the future that's focused specifically on certain technology. There are a few amazing projects that we're working on that where I hope we can unveil some of this at the later stage.
So Christian, we're seeing a lot of these different we're seeing a lot of these things develop and stuff, but how do we ensure though that as these markets are developed, that the number one person to benefit is the farmer? Because I feel like that's some of the issue that we're seeing right now in sustainability initiatives or carbon market stuff, is that how do we ensure that the farmer, the family farm, and rural communities are the number one to really be able to benefit?
I take it to the next level, and that's it's not just all farmers, it's their families and their kids and the future generations as well. So it's an extrapolation of us together with them. It's about people and people benefit, and like I said, creating that world going for. There is definitely an opportunity for continuous improvement, but like every change out there, it's not easy, especially when you know what you're doing. You guys have done a fantastic job, right? So if somebody says change things, you go like, you know. So there has to be certain, I would say, incentives or motivational factors and help provided by financial institution and government and other opportunities out there where you could get a financial benefit out of this exercise. And this is the reason why, I don't know if you guys know this, we can talk about it a little more in the next few minutes, but Rabobank launched a program called Carbon Bank, the only financial institution in the world that's messing around with carbon credits right now, right? Messing around, like we're not. Hopefully we know what we're doing. But so we launched that pilot program, and a handful of clients we discovered through that pilot program, and the fact that we need to go through it, we discovered Mitchell and we partnered with them. So it's absolutely fantastic partnership that I'm looking forward to forge for the next foreseeable future as well. But in that pilot program, we're looking at ways to incentivize the clients that are participating to actually take charge, implement regenerative agriculture practices, get incentivized monetarily to do that, and then do something with that carbon credit somewhere else where people are not as fortunate to actually have the opportunity of taking charge or doing something about that. So that's one way to work together and actually provide benefit for the farmer. The other one is you can create the model out there where you say, here's the criteria. If you participate as a client or as a client of Rabobank in certain things related to this criteria, then you will be, receiving certain benefits out of that. So, and that whole criteria could be all about sustainability. So that's another program that we're working on.
More carbon markets, Zach.
Or carbon markets. Yeah, it's like the Wild West. I don't know where you're going to go right now. It just seems like everybody's trying to figure out exactly what do we take this idea, how do we take this idea and figure out what direction to go with. Right now, it seems like everyone's kind of scattering and trying to figure that out.
That's exciting, though. That's super exciting. Imagine partnership. Imagine us here. That's why we're here. We're here to actually figure that out. This is good. This is awesome. Come on, this is like a new thing. It's like .com, over again. I mean, hopefully it's not gonna be that painful and see all kinds of organizations crushing out there, but falling from the sky. But this is exciting. And it's not about carbon at the end of the day. Use it as a pilot. It's about water credits. It's about animal welfare. It's about sustainability credits at the end. Can you imagine that we start with carbon and we end up there? It's going to be awesome. This is how we're going to move the needle on sustainability with incentives and partnerships and
It's really about figuring out what is the right thing and how do you implement that in everybody's individual programs.
And so part of that now too, I mean, so you bring up a good point. There's tons of different carbon markets. There's a lot of confusion, and the government is looking at being involved, right? But they know, but I think there's a role there for all of that. Where do we find that balance? Where does this go? And I like that we're bringing up too that we're talking about carbon somewhere, but it's not just carbon.
Right.
How do these markets actually come to play?
I think that's such a great point that Christian made, that yes, carbon today, we're thinking about that. And, to the extent, look, there's a market to the extent that somebody wants to buy it. And so, there can be habitat credits. There could be certainly nitrogen and phosphorus, or things that we're looking at in terms of the nutrient reduction strategy, but there could be a number of. That's why I sort of say it's an environmental credit, or I think you said sustainability credit. I define it as you would like. And on carbon, there, you talk about the things that the government role, or things that need to be better established. There's what I would call, there's a healthy skepticism out there, right? There's a lot of questions. I think a healthy skepticism, but that's too kind. Zach's not sure he agrees, but I think there's a lot of questions, rightfully so. If you're a farmer and you're looking into, you're looking to sign on a dotted line, you better understand. It's with anything. What are you getting into? Have your eyes wide open. Know what you're signing. And that's important. I'd say that about anything that you'd be getting into. So having a healthy skepticism is okay. And it certainly is disruptive, isn't it? And that can be very exciting. I'm excited about what it means for this, again, moving us ahead in what we can do in terms of practice adoption and the layered benefits that can bring. Role for government. There's still some I call them, I put them in a bucket of, there are some researchable questions that still need to be addressed, right? There's things about, when we started a nutrient reduction strategy that was launched in 2013, was based on the first of its kind science assessment that was done at Iowa State University. What that meant was the scientists, not we, the scientists went and looked at the research that says basically for each of the practices that we had in the strategy. It's cover crops. The data shows that there's a 30% reduction in phosphorus and nitrogen loss from an acre planted to cover crops. Now, is it more sometimes? Yes. Is it less sometimes? Yes. But the science says 30%. Okay, then I can go and as one of the principal leaders of the nutrient reduction strategy and say, we can invest in that practice because it has a corresponding nutrient reduction, okay? It's the same type of scientific underpinning that we need for every one of these sustainability credits or environmental credits, carbon being one of them. If you have a practice, what's the corresponding carbon sequestration? Or how do we go and measure that? And then how do we validate and verify that? Those are things that there's still a lot of work to be done there. There's very researchable questions here that we need to know, and I think that is a role for government. And then the second piece that is absolutely a role is to observe a market, to be involved in a market to the extent that there's fairness and visibility. Unfortunately, we're seeing in a cattle market right now what the lack of visibility, what the lack of price discovery means in terms of the relationship between the price that producers are being paid off the farm and what packers are able to charge for boxed beef. So there's an example of where you've got to have true visibility and fairness in the marketplace. Carbon or any other environmental credit or sustainability credit would be no different, and that is a role for government.
I've got a question here. I'm going to read this question. Comes from Terry. This is for Secretary Naig. You talked a little bit about how Iowa and Iowans have been leading the conversation here, or been leading the conservation efforts on the water quality and soil health. But if we're looking at the key metrics of it, is the sum of all these pieces that you're putting together, are they working? Do you have the correct stuff in place when it comes to the funding, the strategies, and the practices? Is that being successful?
I get the question. The answer is, well, yes, we've got the right strategies in place. What we know we have to do is more of it. It takes time, right? It takes the time to make these things happen. There's a reason I went back and started with the Dust Bowl era when I talked about soil erosion prevention. It takes a long time to build that kind of culture of conservation where folks get to the point where we are today on soil erosion prevention. it is the same mentality and the same approach that will allow us to make progress on nutrient reduction as well, nitrates in particular. And so the framework is there. Now, to the question of funding, well, state of Iowa has made a significant investment in water quality efforts. And I will tell you this, one of the things that I think you should hold me accountable for, and something I hold my team accountable for, is to what extent can we leverage state resources? If we're spending $1 by itself, then that's not good enough. We want to leverage that with federal dollars, private sector dollars, landowner dollars. And I think we have a good track record of doing that. So we're going to spend those dollars wisely. We're very good at drawing in federal dollars as well. We're very competitive when it comes to regional conservation partnership programs and using EQIP dollars in the state of Iowa. So, when you knit all that together, yes, now it takes time for the water to show that. And we're also dealing with Mother Nature, who still has the final say in what shows up in that water. But we know, and we measure based on a logic model approach. If you want to see change in the water, you have to see change on the land. If you want to see change in the land, then you have to see change in people. If you want to see change in people, then you've got to invest in information and outreach to people. We're heavily focusing on what are we doing about putting practices on the ground. That's the only way I know how to go out and ensure that we can see the change that we want to see in the water, is get more done on the ground. So to the question, I suspect maybe the question behind the question, are we doing enough? Well, no, we're not doing enough. But I think if you look over the trajectory that the state of Iowa has been on when it comes to key practices, we're accelerating. Just two examples. One is building bioreactors and saturated buffers. We just launched here. In fact, I just got a text today that the first one's going in the ground. 51, we're going to cluster 51 of those practices together. One contractor has been mobilized to build those, and 51 are going in at a time. Wetlands, that's the other one that we're heavily focused on. It's taken us nearly 20 years to build 100. We've got 100 under development that will get built in the next couple of years. Okay, so that's the kind of acceleration that we need to see. We need to see more of it. So that's where that optimism, that excitement from me comes with this whole conversation, is if we can drive more revenue back to farms, if we can create more incentive and more impetus to get more done on the farm, that only takes us closer to achieving our goals of nutrient reduction. So we're definitely headed where we need to go in terms of practice adoption. We just need flat out more of it.
So I definitely see that flywheel really spinning too. And that's what, that's obviously been the big theme of today. is it's definitely accelerating. And back to, okay, with whether it be carbon or any of these sustainability metrics, the thing on the water side is here's a practice and here's a general idea of its impact to carbon sequestration or to improve water quality. My concern with carbon sequestration and the same type of practices, of course, can draw down carbon and help us, but just cover crop is a big spectrum. There's a lot of farmers here that are super innovators that don't qualify for carbon markets today. A lot of guys here have cover crops still growing and they planted into them. And the carbon models today don't allow you to have that overlap, or like relay cropping that we're going to have going. So how do we ensure that we can improve these models, and how do we get better data to go into that? We understand how to create the asset as farmers and ensure that the buyers know that what they're buying is real.
And that's where, again, I would go back to those. Those are great points. That's real. That's reality on the ground, right? And where I would say there's researchable questions that we need to dig into, and the way that looks, that's where land grant institutions are key. That's where private sector is going to be, private sector research, and then here's the other thing. You do sometimes have to start small. You do have to sometimes start by piloting things and demonstrating things. That was our first step in implementing the strategy, was to go out and fund demonstration projects. And that's what I hear USDA saying too, by the way, is, hey, we're looking for people to partner and looking for pilot projects and get some things on the ground. I'm a huge believer in, at some point you got to stop talking about it and get out and do it, and bring partners together to go do it. And you will learn things and you will figure out how to do better. You know what? Sometimes you figure out what you shouldn't do, and that's okay too. But that's the nature of these projects. That's where we are. We don't have this all. We collectively don't all have this figured out. I'm a big believer though in we need to get out and do it. Get on the ground, measure, test some of this out, and then see where it goes.
Mitchell, that's why we're here. Okay. You're here to help us learn how to measure that stuff. So huge opportunity actually to learn how to do that. And there, just like the secretary said, there are so many bits and pieces that still need answers. You need a protocol to follow, not just for carbon, but for the other metrics that we talked about. I think, you know, you need to have a sprint. You need to have certification, verification, tracking. You get a credit. How do you know that it's not going to be double dipping? So where's that virtual certificate that, you know, and so on. So there is a lot of it.
Well, and I mean, Zach, you're seeing a lot of this stuff, and have been watching, and obviously, I pull you in on a lot of different things, and appreciate you being down here too. Thank you for being here. But like to your point, Christian, Dr. Haney is here. Lance Gunderson is here. These guys, Dr. Liz Haney, these are the right people that understand how to quantify this stuff, that understand how to do it. So how do we push on that? How do we, you know, when Zach's seeing a lot of this stuff, there's so many of these things, how do we create better connection so that this can be farmer led and that this can really drive from the ground up? Because I think that's part of the issue, is that's too top down. We heard of some of that earlier today. So how do we ensure that we can drive systems that are going to be real for farmers?
2 words: pilot and time. Okay, so first of all, we gotta try it. Just like Rick said, you know, you gotta go out there and do something. Don't just sit and wait and observe, because you have to experiment what's happening out there. Obviously, without, you know, destroying the crop or knowing what you're doing, but you have to do that. Take accurate measurements and give it a little bit of time, because things are not going to happen overnight. You're not going to see changes in like, I mean, he showed or he spoke about a couple of examples where, you know, the soil. I love, by the way, that soil health metric that you talked about, the index. Oh my goodness, that's brilliant. Okay, that's what we should be after right after carbon. So, and we could even trade that data. But anyway, so we're actually get better financial incentives like taxes and stuff like that, or crop insurance, right? But time is going to solve that problem. So we take 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 years, and over time we're going to see how that practice goes. But we got to start somewhere. We got to do something, right, about that. And if you guys think this is complicated, think of it this way: this carbon is one element, and we're just talking about corn and soybean. We have no idea how many clients we've had with blueberries and sweet potatoes and nursery trees and all that stuff. We're like, where's my carbon? How do I? We have no idea. I don't even know. I don't know whether. Do you know what the regenerative agricultural practices are for blueberries? I have no idea.
Zach, you're all over the place. What are the regenerative practices for blueberries?
I just eat them.
Yeah, that works.
Yeah, I don't know how to grow them.
But I mean, Zach, you've been seeing all this now, and you have had pretty good success with cover crop on your farm this year, but you've had a lot of failures.
Yeah.
How do we? I mean, speaking to that, and I mean some of your response here, and overall thoughts too, on what needs to happen.
Well, it's obviously it's got to start at this level right here, right? I mean, it has to. I mentioned before, it's trying to figure out what is the right thing for everybody's operation. Because you can look at Washington County, Iowa. You can look at Polk County, Minnesota, where I'm from. It's a 7-hour drive northwest of here. Yeah, we're growing the same crops, but the soils are completely different. You know, the climate is different. And 10 miles east of me, they have irrigators, and they dig gravel out of the ground to build roads. And the crops are different there. Everything is different, and it's 10 miles away from me. So we've got guys 10 miles east of us that are using cover crops now. Instead of growing peas, like a vegetable, they grow peas, and they used to put in an early season soybean after that. Now they're finding that a lot of those guys are having better success with putting in a cover crop after that and just letting it winter kill and then planting into it next spring, rather than try to harvest those low bushel soybeans that they double crop. So I think it's just trying to figure out what matches up to every individual's operation, and where, you know, how do you work this in from a 100-acre operation to a 100,000-acre operation, you know, and what is the right thing for each individual person in each area, and just have conversations like this to try to take those steps.
You nailed something that's really important there, and that's that it sort of speaks to a couple of things. One is the diversity of the landscape is real. And, we talk about, Iowa doesn't always get credit for being maybe lacking some diversity in landscape, which is not true. If you travel from, Fremont County in southwest Iowa to Albuquerque in northeast or vice versa, you see a diverse landscape across the state. That's why, we try to live this in how we approach things at the state level, which is you don't need somebody in Des Moines, Iowa dictating what practices go where in the state of Iowa, any more than we definitely wouldn't want somebody in Washington, D.C. or a boardroom somewhere telling farmers what works on their operations. That's not productive. In fact, it'll turn people off.
None of us want our neighbors telling us what we're supposed to do, right?
That's a good point.
So why would we want to listen to somebody else, like you say, sitting in the Wayne or sitting in the boardroom?
So what needs to make sense? And this is one of the key messages. I know we've got a diverse audience. You got a lot of people listening. Got a lot of people here. And here's one of the key factors. And I'm really glad you're here. And I think you're showing it by acting in this way and showing up where you are. Work with farmers. Work with farmers. Work alongside farmers. There's a lot of folks that are trying to figure, a lot of companies, you've got the government regulator and now you got the private regulator, I like to say, that's coming into this in a big way. There's a great way to figure out how things work. Get on the farm, work with farmers, getting things done and learn through that experience. Don't just come in and tell us. Don't just sit at the end of the supply chain and turn back down to the supply side and say, this is what you're going to do, or you find the savings. And I'm worried about that at each chain, you push it further and further down, and it ends up in a farmer's lab ultimately. And that's the end of the line, if you will. And so how do folks all throughout that supply chain, that was an earlier question, right? Every participant in that supply chain should capture some value from this, right? We don't want only the retailer at the end to make claims about certain products and capture all the value from consumers at that one shot. Now that needs to be shared all the way down the supply chain to the producer as well. But I just can't stress that enough. Don't recreate the wheel. Don't jump in blindly if you're an egg business or somebody looking to figure this out. Get on a farm. Let's do a project together. The door's open, and I can't think of a better place than the state of Iowa to come do that. Again, in large part because I think we've got a pretty darn good track record of welcoming partners and being innovative. For as long as we've been farming, we've been improving. You're always trying to do it better. And I think that's something that we also need to make sure folks are getting credit for, is the great work that's been done to get us to today. Less energy use, less water use, better feed conversions, you name it. There's all kinds of metrics that we can point to say that we're more sustainable today than we used to be. And that's only a good foundation for where we are going.
That's the biggest thing on all of this is innovation. And obviously in this room, some of the most innovative farmers, definitely in the state, but in the country. There's some of the top guys here. And what they do though, don't register on what's the water impact of some of those things like relay crop? Well, we don't have that yet. What's the carbon impact of it? How do we work in Christian from a massive global corporate scale? How do we help to be able to showcase innovation, ensure that drives, obviously some of the players involved in whether carbon or sustainability overall, some of the biggest companies in the world that are involved in this. How do we help to showcase to them, here's our opportunity as farmers to create new assets. That's what we're creating. We're creating a new asset. But I think it's more than just check the box on cover crop or check the box on what's. There's so much more nuances to it. And that additionality is an ongoing thing, just like regenerative ag. Everybody in this room has a different definition of regenerative ag. It's different for every farm, Zach, like you brought up. How do we help to better showcase those nuances so that we can ensure that this is going to be real for the massive players around the world?
Just like was said a couple of times today, we really have to show that value. So first of all, we have to capture it and show it across the entire chain. But some of the large corporations out there have made unbelievable commitments related to sustainability, right? Which they're going to have a hard time trying to meet their goals unless they partner up, unless they start recognizing the farmers for what they can do. So So I think financial institutions and a few other organizational types of organizations can actually help quite a bit in this respect in multiple ways. So number one is recognition. So recognize the farmers, the clients for the work that they're putting in this field somehow and market that to the other side of the spectrum. So that's again the program that we're working on. Hopefully we can launch it at the beginning of next year. But having you have processors and retailers looking for more sustainable farmers. Who's gonna say what's a more sustainable farmer? Like if you are within the same or part of the same organization, you can actually connect those dots and look at the entire value chain and make that happen. The other thing is reporting, right? So you can actually either as a financial institution, trade associations, or government are also you can tap also into this opportunity to keep track of it and look at percentages and reporting and periodic stats. And it was mentioned earlier today, infographics. You guys have no idea how powerful those things are. Just a little bit of a picture and 2 percentages. You don't even need to read the words, just look at the picture and the percentages. So simple things like that, right? That would actually make the case. And at the end of the day, it's gonna have to tie to, one thing that we have, all of us have in common, or actually a couple of things, but one of them, we're all consumers. At the end of the day, it's up to us to go and buy something that's more sustainable out there in the market. And when we say, well, consumers want A and B and C, I'm like, have we asked ourselves what we want? Like, we have 5 kids. Can you imagine my wife going, or both of us together going to the supermarket and trying to look at the labels and read all the little, footprints in there, and one of them is going to be carbon and water and so on. I don't have time for that. Right? So we got to do a better job on how we tell that story. And I think from my point of view, my expectation is that we do the right thing, we create the most sustainable product, and that high quality innovation, efficiency, taking care of the land, the water, and all that stuff, it's all part of it. Okay? And I want it to be safe as well. That's kind of like, that's what we're paying for. It's already there. So I think it's our duty to continue that, because right now we have 5 boxes of cereal or types of cereal that we find in the supermarket when we go to the grocery store. 30 years from now, we want to see at least 5. We don't want to see 2 or 1 and a leftover box because we run out of food. So that's the thing, right? So we got to make sure that we do the right thing, the things that we're supposed to, so we can actually address that increased population.
It's a 2-part question here, and any of the 3 of you can go ahead and answer however you want to. But if we're talking about carbon markets here, if I understand it correctly, we've got families out here that are doing their best to move the deal, go forward, be more sustainable, do the right thing. Now we're talking about getting paid something to continue those improvements. So there is a company, a corporation or an industry at the top that wants to pay money to buy these credits so that they can claim that they're doing the right thing. In a way, are we allowing them or taking their incentive away from them to do the right thing? Are we saying, as long as you can make it work, you just write a little bit bigger check, buy a few more credits here, and then we'll put the work on these people sitting here to do the right thing, and we'll let the company claim that they made the improvements to the planet, right? So that's the first part of the question. The second part of the question is, how do we make sure that the people over here doing the work get fairly compensated for that? Because we all know there's a middleman there who's going to want to keep it a secret with how they're handling this program between the 2, right? Maybe I got a little too heavy there, but I'm trying to figure out how do we make that right?
You're right on the money. Here's the thing. So we're all using iPhones, right? Do we want to continue to use iPhones? If we do, we better work with Apple and make sure that they get to that 0 emissions that they promised, because otherwise there's not going to be any of this. They're going to get shut down. Okay, so their stakeholder, that made such huge promises to the stakeholders that for them to continue to stay in business, they gotta do what they gotta do. Now they have to pay for it.
But they also were able to make that claim without having to come out here and figure out how to not till their fields and how to grow cover crops, how to make the soil water.
But so the sweet spot is you can actually, there's two sides, right? There's regenerative agriculture practices, and because of that, you capture a certain carbon. You can trade the carbon, compensate these guys for the carbon. But you're not actually taking away the fact that they have implemented regenerative agriculture practices. So that could still continue to be a claim and carry it over. So you can, it's not double dipping. It's basically different assets that we're talking about. One is I would say the root cause or the source that actually produces the second asset. You sell one of them, you still have the other one. So you can continue to do that. How they're, we ensure that they're fairly compensated. I think somebody, unless you can put our farmer community straight together with Apple in the same room, you're always going to need some middleman. Now, not all the carbon credits need to be sold. There are a whole bunch of organizations out there that need to offset their own, stuff like government, right? Maybe we're going to use some of that carbon stuff to offset our own, emissions. Maybe we can bank on it for 40 years from now and see where the carbon, market is at that point in time. Maybe we can give a certain percentage back to the farmers that produced it like 20 years ago. So that's, you're always going to need that middleman, and they have to make a little bit of money on the side anyway. The other thing is you got to look at it as a true asset that hasn't been quantified yet. And so I firmly believe that the market is going to settle on a fair price that's going to be okay with that for everybody, the buyer and the seller as well. And from the farmer perspective, I firmly believe that it's going to be a package of compensation. So there are already offers out there for, well, we're gonna compensate you just for implementing cover crops. So you make a little bit of money for that. Then if you expand that and you do it more systematically, then you have carbon, so you get the money for the carbon. And then if you do something else, you get a little bit of a tax credit, so that comes in as well. So if you look at the whole package, I think it's gonna come out fair for our farmers.
Well, I think it's about stacking those benefits, and I think what's going to be interesting in how I'm looking at this is the people that we're working with. What's in it for them, and who are they trying to make? Everyone's got to make money in this, and that's what I always talk about. Sustainability doesn't matter if the farm is not economically sustainable. This has to be a business decision, and we have to be able to ensure that the farm has dollars coming in, so that we can reinvest. We can really continue to push. So we're seeing some of these policies being developed. We're talking, Mike, on obviously we have a long way to go. We need to ensure that the innovators are making money out of this. And we got to stack all these different benefits. As we wrap this up, where do we continue to go? How does this drive? And a good question from John in the submittals is, how do we ensure that this is going to be good for not just big farms, but small farms, that blueberry farmer, and even farmers in Minnesota?
Even farmers in Minnesota. That's good. Well, I think part of it is I wrote down prove it, right? Prove it, underlined. We have a long ways to go to prove it. And that means we need to get on the ground, do things, research, and this very much is an emerging market. Zach, you nailed many of the concerns that are legitimate. Those are real. It is, as I said, one of my great concerns is that the value isn't shared with some equity or some fairness down the supply chain. That is essential to this. Otherwise, this just becomes an increased cost of doing business for farmers, and it doesn't work. And that's the other thing we have to look at. There's policy framework that still is to be developed. Congress will have an opinion on this. There's going to be legislation, right? There's a farm bill that's coming. This administration has ideas about what they'd like to do. Remember that a lot of this could be met with higher costs of doing business for farmers. there may be revenue that makes its way back to the farm because of selling credits. But if my cost of energy and my or some of this becomes a barrier to entry to a marketplace, it drives up my cost of production, that's problematic. That's not sustainable. And so again, that's where there's got to be equity throughout that supply chain, a marketplace that's got visibility to it. And then, Christian, I think you went there too, which is how do you compensate? What do these packages look like? And then are you basing it on modeling? Are you basing it on some measuring in the field? There's a lot of things that still need to develop here. I think that this can be very good, but there's a lot of work to be done to bring this market to some maturity. We're very much on the beginnings of all this. Again, as I look at it from my chair in the state of Iowa, the good news is, from a practice standpoint on the ground, many of the practices that we're talking about that connect with this, and we got a few blueberry growers in the state of Iowa, but it's not my primary concern. But when I look at livestock production, when I look at the major crops that we produce here, and where we are in terms of our efforts to prevent soil erosion, build soil health, and improve water quality, when you start talking about generating environmental credits, we're talking about many of the same practices. That's good news. What that means is then we can be talking about these frameworks for the marketplace. We can be talking about how to incentivize, and we can go out and do that precision work that needs to be done to make sure that each farm is getting exactly what they need and implementing practices as they should. So there's a lot of work to be done here. I would again, have that healthy skepticism. You should in any aspect of what you do. But I think there's reason to be optimistic that this will come together in a way that is positive for farmers. But we've got to make sure that we're doing our part to ensure that happens.
I've got a question here from John surrounding regenerative agriculture. He wants to know, is regenerative ag better suited for family farms than big corporate farm operations? And if so, why?
Well, I think it's interesting, Christian, to hear your thoughts on this too. But I mean, the cool thing of why I think this can work is it's all about being able to drive that bottom line. That this can be a really smart business decision, but there's some major hurdles to overcome. And we talked about reducing risk here earlier. That's huge. But yeah, how do we balance it? And how do we work with big and small, and everybody? So I think it can really fit in all of them. But with some of these really large farms, it's just tough to be able to make that leap. There's a it's a bigger pie, it's a bigger shift. But I mean, Christian, how do you guys evaluate it? And whether that be on farmers or on driving innovation and change overall?
Without putting pressure on anybody right now, I can tell you that the weight of the world is on the shoulder of this state, and in particular counties like Washington County, to actually expand and prove that this is possible. Because if we cannot move the needle here, family farms or commercial farms or not, then people are not going to be able to do that or copy what we do here in other parts of the world. So we have to do it in both areas. Personally, I think it's a lot more easier for a commercial pie. I'm thinking pies, right? So they have a bigger pie. So you can take, if you go and steal a little bit of a slice and you cover it up really well, you don't even see it, right? So you can actually have a portion of that operation dedicated to regenerative agriculture and mess around with it and see how it works before expanding it. So obviously the impact is going to be much bigger in commercial operations than it is in family-owned businesses. But you got to do both. The family-owned businesses, though, have the opportunity for differentiation, right? So if you do it, and if you put the right claim, the right spin around that, plus the carbon credit which you can get for it, then that's a true good incentive for a family operation as well. The risk might be a little bigger, but like Rick put it this morning, you try things, you try them on a couple of acres to see how they go, and you expand. The good news about family-owned business is that you know your operation a lot better because you're so connected to the ground much more than a commercial operation.
And in general, it's probably easier to turn that ship, right? There's maybe not as many pieces, you don't have as many acres to implement it on, but like you said, on a larger farm, you may have the potential to affect more acres. So if you want to make that difference, it's got to come from both.
So this has been awesome. And Zach, to kind of wrap things up, you've seen a lot of this stuff. And what's your thought on these markets overall and kind of the skepticism on where this goes? How are we feeling?
Well, you heard my skepticism. I would say I'm just going to kind of wait for the three of you to figure it out. Then as the farmer, once the water starts to become less muddy, maybe I'll be able to see where exactly this is going, right? I mean, I'm paying attention to it all the time, but at some point, it almost feels like we keep talking about carbon credits, but I don't know where to go with it yet. I don't know how to get paid for anything yet.
I don't either, Zach. So
No one either.
we're working on it. But so the final question there, and to that point, which is great, this is the Wild West. And to wrap this up, how do we tame the Wild West? There's a lot of moving parts. There's tons of players in this, but we're going to figure it out. It's going to come through. So take us home. Where does this go? And what's our final rah, so that we can go get my cover crop planted, so then it can start raining.
I'd say start walking the Oregon Trail, right? Because that's how the Wild West got conquered. So I actually disagree with you, Zach. If we want to make this happen, you gotta come and partner with us. Don't just sit on the bus and say, well, let me see what's going on. No, we need you. I mean, if
Zach, that's what you say, show me.
Yes.
I already kind of mentioned that.
Yeah, so let's try it out. Let's try it together. Okay, we're not ready for that because we're still in the pilot phase, but when we are, let's go. Let's partner up. Let's make it happen. It's gonna be awesome.
I think with any emerging markets and technology, there's I'll go back to the show me, prove it, pilot, demo. Let's do something. Let's do something together. To those, again, I would extend the offer, to those who are really interested in trying to figure out how these things work. There are researchable questions. There's still a policy and a legal framework that needs to be developed. There's a functioning marketplace that is needed for farmers, and all participants have visibility to it. And there's just no doubt there's a lot of work to be done. That said, there's a tremendous amount of interest. This is very disruptive. I think there's all the signs that this could be very positive for us. But we need to ensure that each of us is playing our part, that we're playing a role. And again, I think a state like Iowa is well positioned to be a part of that proof of concept and to benefit from it greatly because of where we've come, because of the work that's been done in places like Washington County and other communities, where folks simply got together and made it happen and learned from each other. And that's probably my final point is, and some of you probably heard me say this, but some of the best presentations that I've seen when it comes to cover crops or conservation adoption have started with, we did that and it failed miserably. And I think, oh boy, here we go. And then we did this and it started to work. And those are some of the most credible and most important conversations of peer-to-peer, farmer to farmer. Folks sharing, commiserating, if you will, on what worked and what didn't work. But that's something. Those are things we can do together. And let's get things done on the ground and let's make this future. I think that's the piece that we want to be a part of it. We want to benefit from it as farmers and as Iowa agriculture. Then we better be engaged in making it happen.
Now I'm all fired up. That was good. So, but I love that. And I think this has been a really great way to be able to wrap this up. And I just want to say a huge thank you for you guys to be here and share in that. We've talked a lot about Washington County, and obviously there's farmers here from all over the country and people tuning in from all over the world virtually. But the key thing to drive home and to wrap all that up is what I learned from the farmers from Washington County on our special project, and many of them here, is that they took that approach and they said, I see this new path forward and I'm going to make it work here. Instead of a lot of farmers say, oh, that can't work here. And it's tries and I mean, Zach, you've been right there, trial and error, and then figure it out. But excited for the future of this. and really appreciate you guys, being part. And yeah, let's go make it happen. But let's give everyone a huge round of applause.